Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the next episode of Life's Black Belts. As always, I'm your host, Eric Alders. Looking forward to bringing to you our next Life's Black Belts guest. Today, I am joined by Andrea Firpo. She is a intuitive energy healer, otherwise known as a psychic cheerleader, which we're going to get into a little bit detail about what that is. In addition to that, she is the host of Brilliance Through Resilience podcast, and she has a very interesting story on how her life got her to the point where she is today. So I'll save that for our interview. So let's welcome Andrea to the show. How are you, ma'am?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. Hanging in New Jersey on the East Coast, West Coast, but through technology, we get to have this awesome conversation with one another.
It is pretty awesome, isn't it?
I love it. Get to meet some nice people. I'm sure as a host, you get to meet some people all across the world. And if it wasn't for this this venue here, we probably would have never had a chance to get to know one another. So we had spent, some brief time for people that don't really know the behind the scenes of the show. I always try to do like a very quick phone call with people, just get a real rough understanding of their background. But really the show here in the interview is about a live organic interview where I only have some basic bullet points on you, and all of your answers and questions are pretty much, live. I don't know what you're going to say. I don't even know what questions I'm going to really get to as it unfolds, which is why I like it, because it needs to, I want the audience to make sure that it feels real and raw to them. And that's relatable as opposed to just reading off of a script right now. And,
Yeah.
thankfully, as a podcast host, I would imagine that you have the same type of experiences as well. So without any further ado, let's get into things real quick. So obviously we're going to get to the point of what you're doing today. And you've spoken to me a little bit about your upbringing and having some ups and downs throughout your life. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what life was like for you? Start with growing up as a young girl and what life was like for you.
Yeah. I was born in a family that had several types of abuse going on. I don't necessarily want to go play by play, but I will tell you that it was in an emotionally unsafe environment, and sometimes physically unsafe environment. And so what I experienced throughout my childhood because of those experiences, and also due to some very serious mental health issues that run through the female line in my family, I experienced several different types of abuse and trauma. And going out in the world, it was not encouraged to leave my house. Even when I was a child, I had a highly, highly anxious mother. We lived very remotely, and we did not live around a lot of people. I was painfully shy as a child and hypersensitive, what psychologists would refer to as highly sensitive child. To talk to adults made me cry, especially men. And, I grew up with two parents who were working class family. They worked very hard for the living and the wage that they earned. My mom was a waitress. My dad was a cop and an investigator in the 60s, put himself through law school, became deputy district attorney, became very famous in Orange County where I grew up. So it was a very private life, wasn't allowed to give out my phone number. We didn't have a lot of people over other than family, which was pretty messed up on both sides too. So family get-togethers were very, very intense, and we'll leave it at that. So, growing up in that lifestyle prepared me for making some very interesting decisions as a young adult. I didn't grow up with any boundaries, and I wasn't allowed to have any boundaries. So I went out into the world and got pretty bumped up and bruised and scraped up almost immediately, because my parents didn't teach me and weren't expecting me to leave. I pretty much escaped. I won't say that I was locked in the house, but I'm the only child that really ever moved away, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well,
So
there's a lot there to unpack, and we don't have to go
yeah,
into too much detail, but just to
yeah.
lessen it a little bit, I think when people go through their experiences, they often feel that, people can't necessarily relate to what their personal experience is because no one could possibly understand their life. And I don't know your whole entire story, but I will let you know that I grew up with a bipolar manic depressive mother and have, experienced, a tremendous roller coaster throughout life. A lot of ups and downs, especially as a young child. You're not very aware of what's going on because especially with mental illness, I think a big misconception about it is that you can't really tell that it's the disease that's talking to you. Sometimes you see the person's face, you hear their voice, whereas if you saw somebody with a wheelchair, or if they looked like they had cancer, or if there's something physically disabled on them, you would tend to have a sympathy towards them because it's a little bit more understandable. But when
Mhm.
people have mental illness, you just think people are mean or nasty or rude or whatever the words you want to use, and it's hard to strip away and understand. And it's literally taken into my 40s to really
Yes.
try to understand my mother and accept her and not try to change her, because I had and my brother I guess a vision as young men of what life would like be with our mom growing up, what type of grandmother she would be, and so on. And that was our vision. It wasn't a reality. So you tend to get disappointed about these creations that you make in your head, these hopes that you have, and you learn to not, try to let yourself down with those and just kind of learn to let go and accept what's going on. So again, I don't know what you've been through, but I can relate to feeling trapped in certain situations and locked down, not physically, and completely loved, obviously, in my home. But I mean, lots of stories, ups and downs, and things along those lines. Were you
Yeah.
I had my older brother, to help me and help each other through that.
Yeah.
Were you an only child? Do you have siblings?
I have two older sisters. They're 5 and 6 years older than me. And my oldest sister has never been diagnosed, but I suspect has sociopathic tendencies. And my mother is definitely, I'm not a psychologist, and my mom's never been to a therapist, but she definitely is a narcissist. If you were to read about what a narcissist would be.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, when you're growing up, and you said that you felt very isolated from others and very shy. So let's talk not necessarily about the mental or physical abuse that you had to go through, but obviously it had an impact on you. You had even mentioned that you had difficulty speaking with adults and men in particular.
Hmm.
How did this impact your school life and your social interaction, through high school and so on?
Yeah. I never fit in. I was from Orange County, California, so I mean, it's very complicated. My grandmother was a vaudeville dancer, so it was very, very important growing up how I looked. So I was dressed like a doll, first off. And while I did enjoy the attention that it got me from my family, necessarily, it outside in the world was pretty misunderstood. I got bullied quite often for wearing, a dress with a pinafore and curls in my hair and ribbons and,
Sure.
tights. This was the 80s, don't get me wrong, the 70s, late 70s, but still just kind of dressed like a princess at a public school.
I understand. Yeah. So, and especially in California, it has a different, reputation for a certain type of, valley type of girl and, surfer type of girl attitude. Is
Right.
that like Orange County as well, or?
Like in Orange County as
No, I'm
well.
saying is, and I know that I'm from the East Coast, so I mean, obviously, I'm sure you have your misconceptions about us, of the tri-state area and how it is. So sometimes
I
people
don't
will
know.
look at the California mindset of like the out on the beach and the Hollywood
Yes.
mentality, blonde hair, blue eyes, and
Yes. Yes. And if you
is that like
notice,
what it was like for you growing up? You're
yes,
not blonde hair and blue eyes.
not blonde hair, but my sisters both had blonde hair and blue eyes. So
Okay,
I was the oddball. My sisters called me poop eyes, actually. Um, so I was definitely the oddball in my family. I was the oddball out in the world, right? And then I was hypersensitive. I had major issues in school. I had, it was considered very slow in my family. My mom taught me the teacher's manual every summer to help me catch up starting in 5th grade when she put me into private school, mostly because they were so concerned about my social environment and me adapting to kids. They pulled me out of public school and put me into private. So I definitely had issues with school and with blending in. I was just different, in every way. And if you look at my astrological chart, for anyone who's listening who studies astrology, due to me being all water signs, I was psychic from the beginning. So I would be in adult conversations and giving my mom's friend advice, speaking to her like an adult. And I was, 7 or 8 years old, and handling complex information that I just shouldn't have access to, if that makes sense. So I was just seen as a truth teller, right? I would be in conversations and have very clear recognition as to whether someone was lying or not telling the truth, right? So I was hypersensitive and just picked up on things. And so because of that, for a narcissist, that was seen as very valuable. So my mom put me on stage to get over this shyness. And I spent from age 8 until my 2nd year of college a cheerleader. That's where the cheerleader part comes from in my name. I've been a cheerleader most of my young adult life, right?
So I'm a Pisces. What water sign are you?
I'm a Scorpio with a Pisces rising and Pisces moon.
Okay. So I also have always been very sensitive, and it's the two sides of me, which is the tough martial arts fighter, but also in front of my students and at events and things like that. I've, come to tears in front of them many times and have been always very comfortable with my emotions, and also have been very intuitive with people and feeling their emotions, and a truth teller sometimes to the point where I'm told I tell the truth too often, but not in a blunt way, always in a very sensitive way. And then a side note we share in common, not throughout high school because I thought it was silly, but when I got to college, I actually ended up on our college cheerleading team and eventually became the captain of the cheerleading team at Montclair State University.
What?
Yeah.
Look at that. That's amazing.
That's a whole other story of how that happened. But yeah, no, it just really came from the fact that I was a lifelong martial artist. I was very physical in martial arts. I learned how to do back handsprings, and I could do a full split and things like that. I ended up dating a girl that was on the cheerleading team, and she wanted me to come to practice. And I saw these guys there that were these really big, buff, guys. Very different in high school. I didn't have like one of these like South high schools that are cheerleading's everything. It was, looked down upon if you were a cheerleader as a male, but at the college level, it's much more athletic and physical. And it was all like former football players and wrestlers, and they're throwing these girls 20 feet in the air and catching them and holding them with one hand. I'm like, huh. So they're like, hey, I heard you could do some back handspring. So I did it. Like, hey, you want to try some of these stunts? And once they got me into it, the physical challenge of it kind of hooked me a little bit. I didn't really enjoy the rah-rah as much, but I enjoyed the physical challenge of it. And then it was kind of fun walking across campus in my cheerleading uniform with a megaphone, realizing that everyone doesn't know what my other uniform looks like. And I'm like, say something.
Yeah. Well, so, that's amazing. I did not know that about you. And amazing how much we have in common. Yeah. So I definitely, I was not super popular. I was not the popular cheerleader. Because again, that truth telling doesn't go real well in high school.
I would imagine not, especially with girls. And I have twin daughters. So
Catholic high school. So, I was not super popular, but I was very athletic, and I had a very driven mom. She wanted me on that team. So my sisters would refer to my outside of school activities as training for the Olympics. She had me very, very busy. Cheerleading has some definite mixed feelings for me. It was very, very nerve-wracking to be on stage. It still is. I have learned over time to become an ambivert, but I am still very much an introvert, which is why I love podcasting, because generally I'm not being filmed, right? Or on stage or presenting to a bunch of people. I do teach classes, and like you, I teach classes. And I used to be a teacher 25 years ago now. So small classroom environments, I really do enjoy that, but large environments, being in front of a stadium, being on ESPN for a high school cheerleading championship was pretty nerve-wracking, right?
So you didn't feel as though those experiences helped you at all to break out of your shell a little bit?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And I'm certainly grateful and appreciative for my mom's, my mom was always doing it out of love, for sure. Yeah. Her want for me to succeed in life. She just, overrid who I was inside, and I grew up very, very confused about who I was allowed to be. Right. So there was this outside persona of who I was supposed to be and expected to be. And then there was me. And I just walked around in the shell all of the time. So for me, my 20s were very, very confusing, because it was almost like I had to re-find me.
So you felt almost trapped inside your own body, like you were putting on a show like an actress all the time.
Yes, exactly.
So it must be very challenging for you to go, especially when you're at that developing age through your teens and early 20s, trying to figure out who you are and not feeling fully comfortable. Now, you told me a little bit about high school. Did that evolve and change at all in college, or still not yet? You were still struggling?
Oh, no. I struggled all the way through my 20s, I would say, with who I was. I was very brokenhearted about it, because, trying to break what my mother's expectations of me, she turned my entire family against me because of it, right? They're still all angry at me because I moved away, so where was I going with that? I guess my point is that I really, while I'm appreciative of being pushed out of my comfort zone, I really was confused for a very, very long time about who I was, and that it wasn't safe to be who I was. I got really good at playing everybody else, or what other people wanted from me. I was still learning my boundaries, my comfort zone. And so those got pushed really far in a lot of cases, depending on the relationship, especially with men and as I started to actually date. But I had a bunch of hiccups to begin with anyway. I mean, my first day of college, I was raped. So
oh my God.
I stepped out of my house and literally already was in another traumatic incident. So it took me a long time to get footing, if that makes sense. I fell in love with someone at 19, and got pregnant with him and ended up, having an abortion with him. And then 2 years later got pregnant again. And it wasn't due to trying. The circumstances are like, one night stands or,
sure.
So it was never due to, the fact that I was trying to get pregnant. I just kept getting pregnant. I kept having instances in life that were unstable. And it's because I believe that I came from such an unstable environment. It's almost as if, I won't say I was creating it, but I was certainly magnifying my experience. If you believe in the law of attraction or manifestation, right? It's the simple idea that we are mirrors outside of us, and whatever we are expecting, thinking, feeling, speaking, all of that is being magnified out, and the universe is essentially like, oh, you want more of that? Okay, cool. I'm going to match that and give it back to you. And so it just becomes this reciprocation. So a lot of times in trauma, and this is what I work with my clients, a lot of times in trauma, we just are consistently stuck in this pattern of routine, and we can't figure out how to get out of it. You know, breaking that pattern hasn't been modeled to us yet, or we haven't come across somebody who does it differently. We may suspect that we can change it, but we don't know how. We haven't envisioned it yet. We haven't pushed through that ceiling, right? It's like, this is comfortable, and I might know that something's on the other side of that wall, but it's a little bit scary. And I've been doing it this way the entire time, so I'm just going to keep doing it that way, right?
It sounds incredibly traumatizing what you've had to go through. But unfortunately, doing what I do and doing a lot of women's self-defense and things like that, of course, also being married and being in school and having a lot of female friends, it unfortunately is not a rare story. And I feel like it's the majority of females I come across, which obviously a father of twin girls, you know, scares me, of course, that I'm, you know, trying to raise and empower them as much as possible to hopefully make the best decisions possible. Of course, they can't control everything, but you want to try to hope they could avoid some of that trauma, because a lot of the people that you encounter, they, you know, sometimes have never even spoken about it before or ever reported it, and you're battling it within and, you know, trying to, like you said, trying to figure out how to break the cycle, or sometimes even feeling like you've created it or you've done something bad in your life where for some reason you think you deserve it. And it's this whirlwind of mixed thoughts and emotions of trying to figure out why it's happening to you, and how, you know, going through all of this with, and again, we're just kind of touching on it a little bit, but, you know, getting a full sense of what this was like for you during these tougher times before we go, you know, further. Was there anything going on at that time of your life that felt strong and positive to you, that did feel genuine, that you were doing at those times, that you were still had these major struggles, but there was glimpses of your genuine self that made you happy during those times?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Tell me like it is, Andrea.
It
Come
was
on.
a very dark time in my life, and that's pretty funny, right? Because I'm so smiley.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so smiley and happy now, but it was a tough road to get here. No, I was breaking a lot of rules, right? I was breaking a lot of rules with my family. I was breaking a lot of rules with what their expectations were of me. So my relationship with them was consistently volatile in my life, and it impacted me greatly. You know, and grieving, I think it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I actually really did the heavy work in a therapist's office of grieving, never having the mother that I wanted. Right. So there's been progressive, a progression of evolutionary experiences, obviously, that led me here, just like in anybody's life. But
So why don't we go there for a second then? And what is the beginning of the change that led you down, you know, your eventual path of happiness? Is there a significant moment or time period in your life where you were like, this is where things started to change for me?
yeah, it was my second DUI. You could
Okay.
say it was a come to Jesus moment. You know, I had a heavy drinking problem. All three children do, and my father is a recovering alcoholic. So
Okay.
I will just summarize it by saying I created a major mess of my life. And I was required by the state of California to do some pretty intensive counseling. And I really thank my therapist, but because there was a turning point in the class where I started to actually take responsibility for a lot of things that I never had the courage to do. And she really led me through that. But I was dousing alcohol on myself to subdue the pain that I was in. And I just kept, ending up in therapist offices and not fixing it. So it started there, and that was an evolutionary process of taking more responsibility and taking more responsibility for my choices in life. And in doing so, I became more empowered in my choices, if that makes sense, right? I wasn't so passive with life. That was part of my problem, is being incredibly passive, because I was a people pleaser. So it was like, oh, you guys all want this? Okay, great. I'll just keep doing that. So taking more responsibility for my actions really started to help me love my life, because I was choosing things and taking responsibility for it on top of it. So it was a win-win. And so there was a changing, a real, pivotal moment. I had many, but really then being diagnosed with Graves' disease right before I was 40. So I think I was 38. I was diagnosed with Graves' disease. And this is an interesting story because I was under a lot of emotional duress in my marriage at the time. And I was under a very high pressure at work, and I did not like my job. And I hadn't liked my job for 20 years. My career was an executive assistant, senior office manager, and I was under a lot of stress. I worked in San Francisco, down in the financial district, and I ended up waking up one morning and my eyes had changed shape. They had gone from almond shape my entire life to round. And Graves' disease is an autoimmune condition that's lesser known, but essentially what it does is your body starts to attack itself. An autoimmune disease is your body literally like attacking itself and deciding it's going to kill you literally by creating inflammation. So it's attacking your thyroid, and then it's attacking the tissue behind your eye, which it recognizes as almost identical. And in doing so, it swells so much that it presses on your optic nerve, which is why your eyes start to bulge out of your head. And with the pressure, they continue to bulge. And you reach this bell curve, and if you go over the other side, your eyes permanently stay that way. And the only way to treat it is by going in through surgery and actually carving out more room in your skull to place your eyes back in your head. So I had both my endocrinologist and my my ophthalmologist screaming at me to go on medication because of my numbers by the time I showed up in their office, which we won't go step by step in the story, but no one believed me. I asked my husband if he could see anything, and he was like, I don't see what you're saying. I would ask friends. I would ask my esthetician. I felt like no one saw what I saw. So for 6 months, I went undiagnosed, and I was having all of these different side effects. And I kept like checking in with everybody, and no one could see it. And I went home to see my mother, which I don't see her very often. And she said, what's going on with your eyes, within less than 30 seconds. And I was like, you can see that? So that led me into someone's office to actually check out what it was. I didn't even think that, I thought I was making stuff up.
Wow. So, and what happened once you started getting to the correct specialists?
Well, when I showed up in their office and they were asking me to do that, I essentially made a choice. I had a background in primarily natural medicine and had studied it for many different years. For many years, I'd gone to an acupuncturist, and I went the natural route. I became really open in my life. And if you could say, I got to the point where I was kind of on my knees. I was ready to heal myself no matter what it took. And that's when I really found energy healing. I had not made progress like that before in my life. And between that and a lifestyle change, I completely redesigned my life and started to actually heal. I had been carrying around so much pain in my life and I did not know what to do with it. And energetically, I was storing it, and it wasn't even a consideration to me that was something that I could remove that way. I hadn't been introduced to that concept. I didn't necessarily understand what was possible once I removed that energy out of my body, in addition to the emotional counterpart, in addition to the physical counterpart.
So
Right.
the acupuncture led you to other forms of natural and energy type healing?
He did, because my acupuncturist turned to me and said, if you really want to change your life, you need a lifestyle change. And at the time, I had been really wanting to move to Portland, Oregon and start over. I had been asking my daughter and my husband for about 8 years to move to Portland. I wanted a lifestyle change for a really long time. So, I heard my guides say when I was in my acupuncturist's office, Portland, as clear as a bell, right in my head. It wasn't my thought. It was literally like someone was speaking inside my head. And I was like, I think I'm going to move to Portland, Oregon. And I came home and told my husband and my daughter that I was going to put the house on the market. I mean, essentially, it kind of rotated into that conversation within the next 6 months. And we did. We put the house on the market, and I moved up here to Portland. And for 5 years, my husband flew back and forth, working full time in San Francisco during the week and coming home on the weekends to make it happen. So, I changed my life. I knew I was killing myself. That was I was on a road of destruction. I'd been on a road of destruction for a really long time because I was in a lot of pain and I didn't know what to do with it. And it really is through being able to work with some very, very talented people and awesome mentorships that I stand here before you. And because of that, I share all of that with the people that I work with. All of the things that I've learned and accrued over times, all of the tools that I've, accumulated, I now teach other people to use in their lives. So that's kind of the story of me.
Right. Now, I would say that often people try to find happiness in a lot of different places, whether they think it's going to be in a career change, in a move. And sometimes it works out for people, but often, and I'm just curious if this is your situation, that is not the outside surrounding circumstances that are always the fix. But eventually it has to come truly from within, because no matter where you're located, what job you're in, what the family structure is, or the finance situation or whatever, unless you truly want to change from within, all the other stuff is kind of superficial. I mean, again, if you're in a very dark, bad environment and, changing that helps be the catalyst in it, it may help. But if you resist it from within, I don't feel they could really make that change. Is that something that was true for you as well, or was simply making the move, the end all be all for you?
Oh, it definitely was the end all be all for me. I had a very different life in San Francisco. In San Francisco in my early 20s, I was stripping and working full time. My husband and I were swingers. We had an open marriage. We lived a very, very different life in San Francisco Bay Area than I do now. I completely transformed my life when I say that I let go of friendships. I let go of a lot when I moved. All the expectations of the social life that we had there and what I was supposed to live up to as a mother and a wife. And, I let go of all of that and I started over. But I was broken. I was willing. I was willing to change. I had wanted change for a really long time, but it got to the point where my body was breaking down.
Sure.
So for me, that scared me because I hadn't even turned 40 yet. And I thought, I don't want to be on medication for the rest of my life. I don't want to, this is I have another, at least I hope, and at least another half of my life at this point, another 40 years. And if I'm already this sick, what is the next 40 years going to look like? Right.
Sure.
So I made a really conscious effort to get to the root cause of why I wasn't healing in any way. So essentially, if I thought someone could help me, I was like, yes. You think you can help me? Perfect. Okay, you're wicked. Yes. Okay, you're a nutritionist. Great. I'm going to start with you. Okay, okay, perfect. And I just started trying everything to get myself through it because I was in so much pain. So
you finally got to a point with all these different mentors and studies where you finally were able to pull it all together.
Yeah.
Is there a moment that you felt after however many years of that education that you were able to look yourself in the mirror and go, finally?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you get to, I hope that everyone gets to a point of self-love where they can look in the mirror and say, okay, awesome. I would say that probably 3 years ago was a huge turning point when I went full time with my business and left my career behind that I'd had for 20 years that I didn't like. That was a huge turning point in my life and also a place of empowerment, right? That was the last missing component for me. I had transformed and healed my marriage and my relationships in my life. And I it had transformed my health and healed my health, right? There's kind of three major areas in everyone's life. And the last missing component for me was my career, right? So once I changed and went full time into a career that I really loved and enjoyed that came from within, that was the turning point where I looked in the mirror and felt like, okay, I feel more authentic. I feel me. Right.
So tell me more about what you're doing now that makes you feel so passionate and excited about finally doing the right thing with your career.
Well, I wake up every day and I'm excited about what it is that I do for the first time in my life. I've never been excited before because I never believed that you could follow your passion and the things that the things that I'm naturally gifted at aren't necessarily always seen as careers. Well, the first time I heard the concept life coach was in San Francisco, and my first reaction was, what does a life coach even do, right? It didn't seem like a legitimate job. It seemed like a dream position for a select few, right? Like a life coach, like maybe a Hollywood star would have a life coach, right? And so for me, it just seemed like I wasn't capable of having a job that I could really love to do every single day. That wasn't even a concept to me. That wasn't even modeled to me by my, by my mother. Right. So my point is that I really transformed when I transformed those three areas. And that's when I truly became happier, and truly started to fall into more things every day and making more choices every day of loving choices, right? I just kept following the things that felt loving and good to me. So the podcast where I highlight women's stories, that feels really good to me. That's why I do it. Working with clients feels really good to me and lights me up and fulfills me in a way that I have never felt fulfilled, except for in those times, when I worked in an office and I was seen as the office mom and I had the naturopathic remedy, or I was checking in with the person as they came in to see how their day was, right? So I was always a mentor. I just didn't know that I could get paid to do that.
I like that.
Yeah. And it came so naturally to me that it was almost right under my nose. I didn't even see it as a profession. I just saw it as who I was. Right. And that I could get paid for who I was seemed super odd. Right.
So that require you to go through some sort of a course or receive some sort of a certification so that people felt comfortable speaking to you? Or is it the life experience that you had and these different spiritual studies that gave you the insight and knowledge to feel as though you could help others? And then with that, how do you then put yourself out there to let people know that your services are available?
Well, yes. I mean, I definitely have different certifications. I guess it depends on what, for instance, I have a master Reiki level certificate, right? Because I've mastered out that different level of attunement and become a Reiki master teacher. So I have multiple certifications. It just depends on what you're referring to. But as far as life coaching experience, every mentor that I've ever worked, every mentor that I've even worked with, including a psychologist who specializes in childhood trauma that I mentored with, has all told me that I have so much applicable life experience that a certification is kind of overdoing it at this point, right? Going back to school for it. I've actually lived most of the, most of the things that are so relatable to most people's trauma. That's why people gravitate to me normally, because they find out my story or they find out parts of it, and they think, oh, if you can look like this on the outside of that, I want to know how did you do it?
Sure. So
I meet people at events, I meet people at classes, I meet people through being on other podcasts such as yours. But that's how people find me.
So I'm curious how I would imagine it. You take the role as any mom would be to try to give your daughter the best life possible. But being that you've had the experiences you've had, as a female, and everything you've learned from it, how do you approach her growing up and helping to try to guide her to maybe follow a path that she can get to the passion and happiness that you have, but maybe not going through so many bumps along the way?
Yeah, that's a good question. She's 22. First, my daughter, I had her singly. So my daughter and I are incredibly close. I think becoming a single mom at a very early age, it changes the relationship mother-daughter, right? So we were dependent upon each other for the first several years of her life, right? So we've always been incredibly close. And even through her teenage years, we were just talking about this last night, it was always important to me. I was fucking up a lot of things in my life, but this was something that I was not going to fuck up.
Nice.
I read every single book, and always had women that were much older than me that had come from much healthier backgrounds and families as mentors and role models for me. And so I was consistently nurturing my daughter the best that I knew how. Now, I'm certainly not perfect by any means, and my daughter didn't come unscathed through life, but she definitely is in a much different place than I was at her age. She's empowered to make her own decisions. She certainly has more clarity around her future. I've been incredibly supportive in helping her create her dreams. That's been super important to me. She just flew to Japan a couple of months ago, and that was a dream of hers, to go study manga because she's an illustrator. So, I'm consistently behind her and helping her make find a way to make things happen in her life as a partner, right? Especially at this point in her life. As a partner, I consistently am trying to help guide her, but also allow her to take her own wings and fly, right? And to kind of almost be the wind underneath at this point. Right. So we're very, very close. We speak all the time. And, you know, I'm very honest with her. I always gave her age appropriate information. You know, I was very careful about what she knew as she was growing up, but I've always been very honest with her. And so, because of that, we're inextricably close, right? I don't ever force information on her, but I certainly answer her questions honestly and authentically, and I always have. So she's very knowledgeable about all of the choices that I've made in my life and why. And she has a tremendous amount of respect for everything that I've overcome, right?
I love that, because it gives you an opportunity to not necessarily have a do-over, but to provide her the motherly experience that I think you had said that you had hoped for early on from your own upbringing. And even though these experiences were very traumatizing for you, and age appropriately you told her about them, probably really helped her and prepare her for her life, and to realize that it's not a perfect world out there, and that these decisions not only can lead you in these different directions, but even if you feel like you're falling on your face sometimes, it's not the end, that you can climb back from that and create your own future and your own success. And as long as you stay focused, and you're honoring your emotions and your feelings and staying true and not quitting, that you basically accomplish anything that you like. So, you know, what a cool, powerful turnaround from maybe having the mother you wish you had to becoming the mother that, you know, you are.
Yes. And that was my number one goal. And thank you for picking up on that and articulating it so well. You've been doing that all along, so I appreciate that. Yes, that was my number one goal. I mean, I was up against the entire world to have her. So the second time I got pregnant, I was unwilling to go through another abortion, and I didn't have the support of anyone around me. But I chose to have her. I could have given her up for sure, but I knew a soul was trying to come through. Like the timing and the way that it happened, and she was almost like a miracle child. So like, you know, at this point I was just like, okay, I'm going to do the work to have this child because it keeps happening. Right.
I love it.
Yeah. And, you know, it's something that I'm super proud of. It's the one thing that I feel really navigated the ship, right? Is knowing that I had to be responsible for someone else. Right. So when you say, was there happiness? I guess if you look back, certainly she gave me a lot of light. My husband gave me a lot of light. They were two guiding factors through all of the darkness, but it was a very dark time. Yeah. I mean, I had a smile on my face because it was practiced, but it was a very, very tough road. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you've come through it onto the other side, and
Thank you.
not only did you battle so much, you could have reached a point where you said, I finally got myself to where I want to be. But because you had lived a life where you were always trying to please everyone else and be something everyone else wanted, you could have reached this point of final happiness and success and just accepted that you finally reached it. But you've now taken it to a point where you now wanted to turn around and help other people, which is it's a rare thing for people to want to go the extra mile and help others. And that really shows how far I think that you've come in
Thank you.
in your life's journey. And it's something you should truly be proud of. And during your life coaching and your in your podcast, what are some of the, and of course you've covered a lot already, but what are some of the strong messages? And again, you said your podcast is very oriented around females, but what are some of the strong messages that you like to try to get across? It's very hard to generalize because everyone's situation is personal, but if there's some generalities that you're able to pass on or leave some, some good life advice to the audience, what may that be?
To have the courage to stand up again. I think that that's really, if I was going to encapsulate it, that is probably time and time again what the story is that I try to tell. through the podcast, right? The stories that women are telling have also brought them to their knees, right? And so how do you get up again? How do you keep going? How do you find the strength? What lights you up? What pulls you out of bed that morning, right? Giving any advice and sharing the wisdom for future generations, because it is a very intense time in our world right now, and the generations below, our generations are essentially really, really they're dealing with a lot. They're dealing with a lot, and how they're handling the pressure. They're very, very angry. They're very, very disconnected. They're very, very scared and afraid, right? And giving them, I'm an energy worker, so we're commonly referred to as light showers or light bringers, right? We're bringing light back into the world. We're showing how things are possible. So I try to tell a story of how things can be possible. When you are at a dead end and you're banging on the door and it's not opening, right? What do? Hey, you have to find another way. You have to pivot. You have to turn. You have to get guidance from someone else. You have to ask for help. You have to reach for help. You have to, if you're religious, you call on God, whatever it is that you do, but you have to keep asking for help. And so I hope that in telling these stories that I'm able to convey that it's okay to ask for help, that it's okay to feel like you have nowhere to turn, but to realize that actually you have so much help around you, not only spiritually, but physically in the world. You're not an island. And if you were to leave this planet, everyone's going to mourn your loss, everyone around you, even if you don't feel that. So that's I guess, what I'm trying to convey in the podcast, for sure. Yeah.
So I'll definitely include that into the show notes, but at least while we have the moment as we're wrapping things up, why don't you tell us a little bit about how people may be able to learn a little bit more about your life coaching, your podcast, maybe if they want to follow you a little bit more, or even maybe they're listening to your story and maybe they're you 20 years ago and they need to reach the point where you're at now and they might want to get your help. Where is some of the best places for people to learn more about you?
You can go to my website at psychiccheerleader.com, or you can find out more about the podcast at brilliancethroughresilience.com. And then I'm primarily for social on Instagram, and that's Psychic Cheerleader. But I also am on Facebook at Psychic Cheerleader, Twitter at Psychic Cheer. I do have a YouTube channel. Yeah, I'm on a lot of different
You're
platforms.
available.
I'm available. Yeah, so just reach out anyway.
So what is if you had to just wrap up with one, next goal for you that you'd like to achieve, you're doing so much. Is there something on your radar of what is next for you?
Yeah, writing my memoir. That's what I'm working on this year. I was a creative writing major, and for 25 years, I've been saying that I'm going to write a lot of this down. So I'm in the process of doing that. Yeah.
Excellent. I think that'll be an excellent book, and I'm sure it'll be challenging to relive it and go through it all again.
It is.
But I hope you find strength in doing that and put it to rest and put it to peace and know that you've taken control over all of it, even though it was once out of control for you.
Yeah.
That you've taken back the control of your life and your happiness, and through your teaching and everything, I hope that you continue to inspire a lot of others as well, especially again, having in my heart with, 2 daughters and knowing what the world, holds ahead of them, to know that there's still, people out there to mentor them. It's good to know there's some good people contributing back to to this dark planet we live on sometimes. So, I appreciate you and appreciate what you're doing. And, even though we only highlighted a little bit, I think we covered a lot of nice stuff about your life and your journey. And thankfully it turned out to be good at the end, and that you have a long way to go still and a lot to accomplish. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you so much for being such a great host and leading me through all of that. I really appreciate it. It was very interesting talking to you. It's wonderful hearing your perspective, and I appreciate, I appreciate your time just as much. So thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, please take a look at the show notes, and you'll be able to see links to all of the websites and social media that Andrea talked about. And I look forward to bringing to you our next guest. Until then, I wish you all the best.